Hello there. Welcome to Science Verse Before Sleep. Welcome to a place where questions unfold like petals in moonlight, where science meets imagination in the quiet hours before sleep. Tonight, we embark on a journey together, a gentle exploration of what makes our world breathe, what makes it green, what makes it alive. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them rest softly on the darkness around you. There is no urgency here, no rush. We have all the time we need. Tonight, we ask a question that seems impossible, yet opens doors to understanding the delicate threads that hold our world together. What if all plants disappeared overnight? Every tree, every blade of grass, every microscopic phytoplankton drifting in the ocean's embrace. What if, in the span of a single rotation of our planet, the green vanished, leaving only earth and stone and water and sky? This is not a tale of horror, but of wonder, a meditation on connection, on balance, on the invisible architecture that supports every breath you take. So settle in, let your shoulders drop, release the tension of the day. We're going to move slowly through this imagining, painting each moment with care, understanding what we would lose. And in that understanding, perhaps appreciating what we have. Now, let's begin. Part 1. The morning after silence. Imagine waking up on an ordinary morning. The sun rises, as it always does, spilling golden light across the horizon. But something is different. Something so fundamentally wrong that your mind struggles to comprehend it, like trying to remember a word that sits just beyond reach. You move to your window, still wrapped in the drowsiness of sleep, and look out at a world transformed. Where there was once a tree, that old oak that has stood outside your window for as long as you can remember, there is now only empty space. Not a stump, not a trace of roots or bark or fallen leaves, simply absence. The air itself seems to hold its breath. You blink, confusion spreading through your waking mind like ripples across still water. Perhaps you're still dreaming, but as consciousness sharpens, the impossible scene remains. Your garden, which yesterday bloomed with roses and lavender, is now bare earth. The grass that carpeted your yard has vanished. Even the weeds that pushed stubbornly through cracks in the sidewalk gone. The silence is profound. You realize, perhaps without quite knowing why, that something essential has been subtracted from the morning soundscape. No rustle of leaves in the breeze. No soft whisper of grass bending. The wind still blows, but it moves across naked ground, producing only a hollow, lonely sound that raises goosebumps on your skin. You step outside, your bare feet touching concrete that feels somehow more final, more permanent than it did yesterday. The morning air fills your lungs, still breathable, still familiar, but you sense that this too will change. For now, the oxygen remains, dissolved in the atmosphere like sugar in tea, invisible but essential. The great ocean of air that surrounds our planet doesn't transform instantly. It holds its breath along with you. Walking down your street, you see neighbors emerging from their homes, faces painted with the same expression of bewildered shock. Some are crying, others stand frozen, as if waiting for reality to correct itself, for this glitch in the universe to reset. Children point at spaces where trees once stood, their young minds perhaps better equipped than ours to accept the impossible, yet unable to articulate the loss. The park at the end of your street, which yesterday was a cathedral of ancient elms and maples, their canopies woven together in green communion, is now an open field of soil and scattered benches. The playground equipment stands exposed, suddenly looking foolish and out of place without the softening presence of surrounding foliage. A swing moves in the breeze, back and forth, pushed by invisible hands, creaking in the emptiness. You notice the sky seems larger somehow, more oppressive. Without the familiar frames of branches and leaves to break up the expanse of blue, the heavens feel impossibly vast, pressing down with their infinite weight. Birds fly overhead, confused, calling out to each other in distress. They wheel in circles where their nesting trees once stood, their tiny minds unable to comprehend this fundamental erasure of home. The news begins to spread. First through frantic phone calls and messages, then through every form of media humanity possesses. The phenomenon is global. Everywhere on Earth, every plant has vanished in the night. The Amazon rainforest, that great green lung of our planet, is now an expanse of bare soil, stretching for millions of square kilometers. The wheat fields of Kansas and Ukraine, the rice paddies of Asia, the vineyards of France and California, all reduced to empty earth. Scientists scramble to understand, but there is no understanding to be found. This is not a natural event, not a disease or a disaster that follows physical laws we comprehend. It's as if the concept of plant has been deleted from reality's code, leaving everything else intact. The impossibility of it is almost as disturbing as the consequences that are already beginning to unfold. In the oceans, something equally catastrophic has occurred. The phytoplankton, those microscopic organisms that drift in the sunlit surface waters, so small that thousands would fit on the head of a pin, yet so numerous and so vital that they produce more than half of Earth's oxygen, have vanished. The water that was once filled with these tiny photosynthetic beings is now clearer than it has been in millions of years. A terrible, empty clarity. Marine biologists stare at their samples in disbelief. The base of the oceanic food web has been removed entirely. The zooplankton, tiny animals that feed on phytoplankton, swim through water that now offers them nothing. Small fish that feed on zooplankton find their prey already weakening. The cascade has begun. But these consequences are not yet visible to most of humanity. On this first morning, in these first hours, what strikes deepest is the aesthetic shock. The world has lost its color. Oh, the sky is still blue when it's clear, still gray when clouded. The soil retains its browns and reds and blacks. Water still reflects silver and azure. Stone is still stone, but the green is gone. That specific wavelength of light, reflected by chlorophyll, which has painted our planet for billions of years, has been subtracted from the palette of existence. Artists and poets will later struggle to describe this loss. It's not merely the absence of a color, but the absence of life's primary signature. Green is the color of growth, of spring, of hope renewed. It's the color that signals, here, life thrives. And now, everywhere, that signal has flatlined. In the cities, the impact is surreal. Parks that provided pockets of tranquility in urban jungles are now just empty lots. Street trees that lined boulevards, offering shade and beauty and cleaner air, have left behind only patches of disturbed soil where their roots once held the earth. Green roofs and living walls, those modern attempts to rewild our concrete forests, are now just gray rooftops and bare facades. Office workers arrive at buildings to find the lobby plants gone, those faithful ficus and pothos that asked little and gave much, filtering air and softening harsh architectural lines. The absence is noticed by everyone, creating an unfocused anxiety, a sense that something protective has been removed, leaving everyone slightly more vulnerable. In hospitals and nursing homes, the therapy gardens where patients walked to heal both body and spirit are now desolate courtyards. The rooms of the sick, which yesterday held flowers brought by visitors, tokens of love and hope, now hold only empty vases. It's a small thing, perhaps, in the face of what's to come, but in this moment, it matters. Every small joy has been diminished. As the day progresses, the sun climbs higher, and people begin to notice the heat. Without plants, without the shade of trees, and the cooling effect of transpiration, the temperature rises more sharply than usual. Urban areas, already subject to heat island effects, become noticeably warmer. The concrete and asphalt, no longer offset by greenery, absorb and radiate heat with nothing to moderate their thermal mass. Meteorologists observe their instruments with growing concern. The loss of plants has immediate effects on local weather patterns, though the full impact will take time to manifest. In forests, or what were forests, the temperature at ground level begins to fluctuate more wildly. The forest canopy once moderated temperature and humidity, creating a stable microclimate beneath. Now, exposed to direct sunlight and wind, the forest floor experiences temperature swings that would have been impossible yesterday. The water cycle has already begun to shift. Plants, in their patient work of drawing water from soil and releasing it through their leaves, returned vast quantities of moisture to the atmosphere. This process, transpiration, contributed significantly to cloud formation and rainfall. In the Amazon, for instance, the rainforest essentially created its own rain, with moisture cycling repeatedly through the system. That cycle has been broken. The water remains in the soil for now, but it's no longer being lifted into the air. The implications are profound, but they unfold slowly, like a story told in whispers. Scientists estimate that in a normal world, the atmosphere contains enough oxygen to support animal life for thousands of years, even if all oxygen production suddenly stopped. But this is not merely about oxygen production stopping. This is about the immediate loss of all photosynthetic organisms. The buffer is significant, but not infinite. For now, breathing remains easy. The invisible ocean of oxygen surrounding our planet is still rich and full. But the source has been cut off. We're living on reserves, though few people understand this yet. Carbon dioxide levels will begin to rise, but again, this is a slow process initially. The oceans absorb tremendous amounts of CO2, acting as a buffer. The atmosphere itself is vast. Change on this scale operates on timescales longer than a single human lifetime, except where it doesn't. Except where tipping points cascade into catastrophe faster than computer models predict. We're in uncharted territory. As evening approaches on this first day, people gather. There's an instinct in crisis to seek community, to find comfort in shared presence. Vigils form in public spaces, though what exactly is being mourned is hard to articulate. The loss of beauty, yes. The loss of food sources, certainly, but something deeper too. A connection to the living world that most people never consciously acknowledged until it was severed. The sunset is different. Without the filtering effect of forest canopies, without the softening presence of fields and meadows, the light is harder, more direct. It's beautiful still. The sky paints itself in oranges and purples and pinks, but it feels exposed, vulnerable. The stars, when they emerge, are brighter in some places where forest canopies once blocked their light, but the night feels emptier rather than fuller. Children struggle to sleep. Parents try to explain what's happened, but how do you explain the impossible? Some tell stories, weaving narratives of hope, promises that tomorrow things might return to normal. But adults lie awake too, staring at ceilings, listening to the strange new silence outside their windows. The night sounds different. No rustle of leaves becomes a presence in itself, the sound of absence, the silence that remains when something essential is removed from the symphony. In research stations around the world, scientists work through the night. They measure and test and calculate. They run models and compare data. They reach out to colleagues, forming a global conversation that spans time zones and languages. The findings are consistent and disturbing. This is real. This is global. And the consequences, when they truly begin to manifest, will challenge everything humanity has built. The Earth continues its rotation. The moon rises and sets, indifferent to the drama below. The planet itself, 4.5 billion years old, has seen catastrophes before the great oxygenation event, the snowball Earth periods, the mass extinctions that punctuate the fossil record. But this is different. This is instantaneous. This is a subtraction of such fundamental importance that it rewrites the rules of terrestrial existence. And yet, in this first day, in these first hours, there is also resilience. Humans are nothing if not adaptable. Already, minds are working on solutions. Engineers discuss artificial photosynthesis. Biologists consider whether genetic technology might rebuild what has been lost. Philosophers ask whether this is, perhaps, a test, a challenge to see if humanity can survive without the foundation that has always silently supported us. As the first day ends, as people finally succumb to exhausted sleep, the earth spins on. The second day will bring new realizations, new challenges. But for now, in the quiet hours of the night, there is just this: a world transformed, a foundation removed, and the unknown future stretching ahead like a dark ocean, vast and full of uncertainty. The wind blows across bare ground. The stars shine down on a planet that looks, from space, increasingly brown and gray and blue, but no longer green. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, the universe holds its breath, waiting to see what comes next. Before we move deeper into this unfolding catastrophe, Let's pause here for a moment. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of your body sinking into comfort. We've witnessed the first shock, the initial bewilderment of a world stripped bare. What comes next will ask us to follow the threads of consequence as they spread outward, touching every living thing. When you're ready, there's no rush. We'll continue together into the second movement of our story, where the true cost of losing Earth's green foundation begins to reveal itself. Rest if you need to. We'll be here, waiting in the quiet, whenever you're ready to go on. Part 2. The Unraveling. The second day dawns, and with it comes the slow, terrible realization of interdependence. Humanity is beginning to understand that plants were never merely decoration, never just the backdrop against which our dramas played out. They were the stage itself, the foundation, the invisible infrastructure of breathable air and edible abundance. In the forests, those places that only yesterday teemed with life, the first major die-offs begin. Insects that depended directly on plants for food are already weakening. Caterpillars, those eating machines designed to do nothing but consume leaves and grow, wander across bare branches that no longer bear foliage. Their tiny bodies, programmed for one purpose, cannot adapt. Within days, they will be gone. With them goes the promise of butterflies and moths, those delicate messengers of pollen, those symbols of transformation. The bees sense something is catastrophically wrong. Worker bees fly out from their hives as instinct commands, searching for flowers that no longer exist. They circle in confused patterns, their sophisticated navigation systems functioning perfectly, guiding them to locations where yesterday there were rich blooms, but finding today only bare earth. They return to the hive empty, performing their waggle dance to communicate to their sisters the location of nothing at all. The hive mind, that emergent intelligence born from thousands of individual bees working in concert, begins to fracture. Without nectar, the hive cannot sustain itself. The honey stores will last a short while, but then starvation will set in. The queen, that central axis around which the entire society revolves, will die. With her dies the colony, and with millions of colonies dies one of nature's most important partnerships, the ancient bond between flower and pollinator that has shaped the evolution of both for more than 100 million years. In meadows and grasslands, herbivorous insects by the billions face the same fate. Grasshoppers and crickets, leaf beetles and plant bugs, aphids and scale insects, all of them specialized over millions of years to extract nutrition from plant tissue, suddenly find their entire world vanished. The air still carries faint chemical traces of the plants that were pheromones and volatile compounds lingering like ghosts. But there is nothing to eat, nothing to sustain them. The herbivorous mammals are slower to realize their predicament, but not by much. Deer, which normally spend their days browsing on leaves and shrubs, paw at the ground where vegetation once grew. Their stomachs, complex four-chambered systems designed specifically to break down cellulose, growl with emptiness. They wander, increasingly desperate, searching for any plant matter that might have somehow survived. They find nothing. Rabbits emerge from burrows to a world devoid of clover and grass. Their rapid metabolisms require constant feeding. They cannot survive long without food. Within a week, most will be dead. The predators that rely on rabbits, foxes, and hawks and owls will find their primary food source gone. The cascade continues upward through the food web, each level depending on the one below, and the bottom level has been completely removed. In the Great Plains of Africa, herbivores that move in massive herds, wildebeest and zebra, gazelle and impala, begin their final migrations. They travel, as they always have, following ancient routes embedded in their genetic memory, routes that once led to rich grazing grounds. But every destination is now the same: barren earth. The herds mill about in confusion, their vast numbers now a liability. So many mouths to feed, and nothing to feed them. The elephants, those wise giants who remember the locations of water holes and fruiting trees across vast territories, use their knowledge to search every location they know. Matriarchs lead their families on increasingly desperate journeys, but their wisdom is worthless now. Every tree they remember is gone. Every water hole they visit is surrounded by bare ground instead of the lush vegetation that once marked its presence. The elephants, perhaps, understand on some level that this is the end. They've evolved to mourn their dead, to remember their fallen. Now they face the mourning of their entire world. In the oceans, the consequences are even more rapid and severe. The loss of phytoplankton has removed the foundation of marine food webs. Zooplankton, those tiny drifting animals, begin to starve within days. They are simple creatures with no ability to switch food sources or enter dormancy. When their food disappears, they die. Their tiny bodies begin to sink through the water column, a rain of death falling into the darkness below. The fish that feed on zooplankton, sardines and anchovies, herring and menhaden schools that number in the millions, find themselves in water that grows emptier each day. They swim through what was once a rich soup of food, now a desert of empty water. The schools break apart as individuals become desperate, searching on their own for food that doesn't exist. Within weeks, mass die-offs begin. The ocean surface becomes littered with floating fish bodies, their scales catching sunlight in a terrible, glittering spectacle. Whales, those magnificent giants who have roamed the oceans for tens of millions of years, face extinction as surely as the smallest zooplankton. Baleen whales, which feed by filtering vast quantities of plankton-rich water through their baleen plates, swim through oceans that no longer offer sustenance. A blue whale, the largest animal ever to exist on Earth, requires several tons of krill per day. The krill, which feed on phytoplankton, are already dying. The whales, with their enormous bodies and enormous needs, will follow quickly. The human response in these early days is a mixture of panic and determination. Grocery stores are emptied in hours as people stockpile what they can. Canned goods, dried pasta, rice, anything that will keep all of it is purchased in a frenzy of fear. But people quickly realize that this isn't a temporary shortage. This is the permanent end of agriculture as we've known it for 10,000 years. The agricultural system of the modern world is a marvel of efficiency and scale, but it's entirely dependent on plants. Wheat and rice and corn, the staple grains that feed billions, are gone. Fruits and vegetables of every variety, gone. The farms that covered vast swathes of the world's most fertile land are now fields of empty soil, still holding the nutrients that would have nourished crops, but with nothing to receive that nourishment. Livestock, cattle and pigs, chickens and sheep suddenly represent humanity's entire food stockpile. But these animals were sustained by plants. Cattle eat grass and hay. Pigs eat corn and grain. Chickens eat seeds and vegetable scraps. Without plants, farm animals cannot be sustained. The calculation is brutal. Every animal alive right now represents the last of its kind, the final harvest. When they're gone, they're gone. Governments begin emergency rationing programs. Military forces are mobilized to distribute food and maintain order. International cooperation, which often fractures in times of crisis, now becomes essential. Nations that were enemies yesterday begin sharing resources and knowledge today. There's no time for old grudges when facing extinction. Scientists present proposals, each more desperate than the last. Could we survive on bacteria and fungi, which were not plants and still remain? Yes, in theory, but scaling up production to feed billions would take years we don't have. Could we synthesize food from basic chemical elements? Again, theoretically possible. But the energy requirements are astronomical, and most of our energy comes from fossil fuels themselves, the remains of ancient plants. Nuclear power plants could provide energy, but there are only so many of them, and building more takes years. Solar panels, ironically, still work. They don't need plants, just sunlight, but our capacity to manufacture them is limited, and many of the materials traditionally used in their construction came from plant-based processes or required plant-based chemicals. Some suggest turning to the oceans, but the ocean ecosystem is collapsing even faster than terrestrial systems. Fish populations, which might have provided temporary sustenance, are in free fall, and without phytoplankton, the ocean's oxygen production has stopped. The ocean, which produces more than half of Earth's oxygen, is now just taking it in as the remaining fish and marine animals breathe and consume. In research facilities, biologists work frantically to preserve genetic material. Seed banks, which were created for exactly this kind of catastrophe, hold millions of seeds representing thousands of plant species. But seeds are dead without the means to grow them, and even if we could restore plants tomorrow, the damage to ecosystems would take centuries to heal. The atmosphere slowly begins to change. Computer models predict that oxygen levels will remain stable for decades, possibly centuries, depending on various factors. But carbon dioxide is rising, not from the loss of oxygen production alone, but from the continued breathing of billions of humans and animals, and from our continued burning of fossil fuels. The balance that has held for millions of years is breaking. Temperature patterns shift noticeably. Without transpiration from plants, which normally pumps enormous quantities of water vapor into the atmosphere, humidity decreases in many regions. The Amazon, which once created clouds that traveled inland, depositing rain across vast areas, now contributes nothing to the water cycle. The rain that falls there now, and there's less of it already, simply flows into rivers and out to the ocean. It doesn't cycle back through the system. In regions that depended on plant-driven weather patterns, droughts begin. Areas that received regular rainfall because of nearby forests find their climate rapidly changing. The Sahel region of Africa, already vulnerable to desertification, loses what little vegetation-driven moisture it had. India's monsoon, partially influenced by the vegetation patterns of the subcontinent, becomes less predictable. Conversely, some coastal areas experience increased rainfall because moisture that would have been absorbed and transpired by forests now runs off more quickly to the ocean, where it evaporates and falls as rain. But this isn't beneficial, it's erosion-causing, flood-producing rainfall that the land, without roots to hold it together, cannot handle. Soil erosion begins in earnest. Plant roots, in their quiet work, held billions of tons of soil in place. They prevented wind from carrying away topsoil. They prevented rain from washing hillsides into rivers. Now, with no roots binding it, soil begins to move. Dust storms form in areas that were once vegetated. Rivers run brown with sediment. The face of the planet is literally being reshaped as soil that took thousands of years to form is stripped away in days. In the cities, life continues in a strange sort of normalcy. People still go to work, though many jobs have become pointless. Financial markets, after an initial crash, operate in a kind of surreal denial, as if capitalism can survive the end of its resource base. But there's a growing recognition that money means nothing if there's nothing to buy. Some people turn to spirituality, seeking meaning or solace in religion or philosophy. Churches and temples see increased attendance. People pray for miracles, for divine intervention, for some cosmic reset button that will return the world to normal. Others turn away from faith, angry at a universe that would allow such catastrophe. Artists create furiously, documenting the world in its transformation. Painters capture landscapes of bare earth under vast skies. Photographers record the empty spaces where forests stood. Writers fill journals with observations and emotions, leaving records for a future that grows more uncertain each day. There's a recognition that this is a pivotal moment in Earth's history, and some deep human need drives us to witness it, to record it, to make meaning of it even as it unmakes us. Children adapt more quickly than adults in some ways. The world without plants is the only world they know now. They play in barren parks, making up new games that don't require grass or trees. But they also ask questions adults cannot answer. Why did this happen? Will it ever go back? What did a forest look like? Parents struggle to describe green growing things to children who may never see them. The elderly, who remember a full lifetime of green springs and golden autumns, grieve most visibly. They've lost not just the present but the past. All their memories are now of a world that no longer exists. They speak of cherry blossoms and fall foliage, of victory gardens and Christmas trees, and their words carry the weight of elegy. They're describing not just plants, but an entire way of experiencing the world, now forever lost. As days turn into weeks, the animal die-off accelerates. Herbivores that survived the first days by eating their fat reserves begin to starve. Carnivores that switch to scavenging dead herbivores find that food source dwindling. The great predators, lions and tigers, bears and wolves, face a world where prey animals are vanishing. They turn on each other, on humans, on anything that moves. But this desperation buys only time, not salvation. Birds, many of which migrate thousands of miles following the bloom of insects and plants, find themselves caught in impossible situations. Arctic terns, which migrate from pole to pole, arrive at destinations that offer nothing. They've burned their fat reserves in flight, expecting to refuel on arrival, but there's no fuel to be found. They die by the millions, their tiny bodies falling from the sky, exhausted beyond recovery. In the far north, where short Arctic summers once saw explosions of plant growth that supported caribou and musk oxen, the tundra is now just bare permafrost. The animals that migrated there for summer feeding find nothing. They mill about in confusion, their numbers dwindling daily. The indigenous peoples who have lived in harmony with these animals for thousands of years watch helplessly as their entire way of life, based on hunting and gathering from the land, becomes impossible. In tropical regions, the loss is especially poignant. Rainforests, which took millions of years to evolve into the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, are reduced to bare ground. The millions of species that live there, insects and birds, mammals and amphibians, most of which depended either directly or indirectly on plants, face extinction. The great biodiversity loss is not gradual, as it was in our timeline with habitat destruction and climate change, but instantaneous and total. Scientists estimate that within 1 month, more than half of all animal species on Earth will be extinct. Within 3 months, that number will rise above 90%. The only survivors will be those species that can subsist on detritus, on each other, or on the dwindling stocks of food humanity is desperately rationing. Scavengers like rats and crows have a brief advantage, but even they will eventually run out of dead things to eat. Fungi remain, and this is a strange mercy. Mushrooms pushing up through leaf litter, except there's no leaf litter now, just bare soil, represent one of the few growing things left. But fungi are decomposers, not producers. They break down dead organic matter, releasing nutrients back into soil. Without dead organic matter, without the constant rain of plant debris that normally feeds them, fungi too begin to decline. Bacteria survive, as they always have, as they always will. They're the most ancient life forms on Earth, the most adaptable, the most resilient. But most bacteria, like most life, depended on the foundation of photosynthesis. The great bacterial colonies that lived in soil, breaking down plant matter and cycling nutrients, find themselves without purpose. Some species will survive, but the rich bacterial diversity of Earth's soils will collapse along with everything else. In laboratories, scientists conduct experiments with artificial photosynthesis. They've made progress over the years in creating chemical systems that can split water molecules using sunlight, releasing oxygen and creating energy-rich compounds. But these are laboratory curiosities, operating at tiny scales. Scaling them up to replace Earth's plants would require industrial capacity beyond anything humanity has achieved. It would take decades to build the necessary infrastructure, and we don't have decades. Other researchers work on genetic engineering, attempting to modify bacteria or algae to perform photosynthesis more efficiently, or to modify them to survive in Earth's changing conditions. But even if they succeed, releasing genetically modified organisms into an environment as unstable as our current one carries enormous risks. And again, even in the best-case scenario, we're talking about years to develop, test, and deploy such solutions. Years we don't have. The wealthiest and most powerful begin to discuss bunker projects, sealed environments where humanity might survive indefinitely on stored food and recycled air. The International Space Station, isolated from Earth, has enough supplies for a few months. Plans are quickly drawn up to resupply it indefinitely, turning it into a lifeboat for humanity. But it can hold only a handful of people, and the ethical questions of who gets to survive are ones nobody wants to face. Underground facilities are proposed, massive sealed complexes that could house thousands or even millions in a plant-free world. They would need nuclear power for energy, synthesized food from chemical feedstocks, and perfect recycling systems for air and water. It's theoretically possible, but the timeline to build such facilities is measured in decades. And the psychological toll of living forever underground, in artificial light, without ever seeing a tree or feeling rain on grass, is incalculable. Some propose Mars colonization, arguing that if we're going to live in sealed habitats anyway, we might as well do it on a planet where we could potentially terraform the environment over centuries. But Mars missions, in our most optimistic projections, were still decades away from launching even small crews. Mass colonization would take centuries. It's not a solution. It's a fever dream born of desperation. As the second month begins, human society starts to fracture. Rationing systems break down as people realize that there's not enough food to go around, regardless of how carefully we divide it. Hoarding becomes rampant. Black markets emerge. Violence increases as desperate people do desperate things. Governments try to maintain order, but their authority is undermined by the obvious fact that they cannot solve this problem. No military force can fight the absence of plants. No economic policy can redistribute resources that don't exist. No political ideology offers a path forward. The social contract that holds civilization together requires a belief that following the rules leads to better outcomes than breaking them. But when everyone faces starvation, regardless of whether they follow the rules lose their power. Some communities do better than others. Small, tight-knit groups that already lived relatively self-sufficiently and that had stores of preserved food are able to maintain internal cohesion. They share resources carefully, support each other emotionally, and face the future together. But even these communities know they're only delaying the inevitable. When the food runs out, cooperation won't matter. There are acts of tremendous kindness. People sharing their last meals with strangers, communities organizing care for the elderly and sick even as resources dwindle, parents sacrificing their own food to feed children a few more days. Humanity, at its best, is capable of remarkable compassion, and that compassion shines brightly in these dark times. But compassion cannot conjure food from empty air. there are also acts of terrible cruelty. Warlords emerge, using force to seize resources. The vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, the young are abandoned or worse. Old prejudices resurface as people look for scapegoats to blame for the catastrophe. It makes no sense, but humans have never been purely rational creatures. We need stories to explain our suffering, even if those stories are false. Religious movements proliferate, some peaceful, some violent. Doomsday cults declare this the end times and prepare for divine judgment. Some groups engage in mass suicide, choosing to exit on their own terms rather than face slow starvation. Others become militant, believing they must purge the world of sinners to earn salvation. The apocalypse brings out both the best and worst in human nature, often simultaneously. Meanwhile, Earth's systems continue their inexorable shift. The temperature fluctuations that began in the first days intensify. Deserts expand rapidly as nearby vegetation no longer moderates climate. Coastlines experience more severe storms as ocean and land temperatures diverge more sharply. The planet's climate, which had been relatively stable for the past 10,000 years, the entire span of human civilization, enters a period of chaos. Ice caps, which had been melting due to pre-existing climate change, respond to new factors. Without plants drawing down CO2, greenhouse gas levels rise steadily. But without transpiration, some regions cool. The global climate system, which had been in a delicate balance, tips into unpredictability. Computer models struggle to make projections because we've never seen anything like this. There's no data from the past to guide us. In the oceans, dead zones expand. Areas where oxygen levels drop below what fish need to survive grow larger each day. The fish die-off releases nutrients into the water, which would normally feed algae blooms, but there are no algae, no phytoplankton to take advantage. The ocean becomes clearer and clearer, a terrible crystalline clarity that speaks of death rather than purity. Ocean currents, driven partly by temperature differences created by the distribution of sunlight and partly by the density differences from the water cycle, begin to shift. The Gulf Stream, which carries warm water from the tropics to the North Atlantic and moderates the climate of Western Europe, weakens as the patterns that sustained it change. Europe, ironically, begins to cool even as much of the world warms. Climate is nothing if not complex. In the Arctic and Antarctic, the loss of sea ice accelerates. Phytoplankton that lived on the underside of sea ice, forming the base of polar food webs, are gone. Krill, which fed on that phytoplankton and in turn fed whales and seals and penguins, die off. The polar regions, already vulnerable to climate change, experience ecological collapse even faster than temperate regions. Polar bears, which had been struggling with habitat loss, face their final days. Their apex predators, dependent on a complex food web that stretched from microscopic plankton to seals. With that web gone, the most powerful predator in the Arctic is reduced to scavenging what it can, fighting over scraps. Within months, the last polar bear will die. With it goes an icon, a symbol of wildness and power, reduced to nothing by the removal of invisible microscopic plants it never even encountered. Penguins in Antarctica face similar fates. These charismatic birds, which captured human imagination and featured in countless documentaries, depend entirely on krill and fish. As those food sources vanish, penguin colonies, some of which have existed for thousands of years, fall silent. The last penguins huddle together against the cold, their evolutionary programming to care for eggs and chicks now tragically futile. There will be no next generation. There will be no future. As the third month approaches, humans everywhere face starvation. The stored food is gone, or nearly so. The livestock have been consumed. Even pets, beloved companions, have been eaten in desperation. People turn to eating things they never imagined, consuming leather goods for their protein, paper for its fiber, anything organic that might provide calories. But these are not foods, not really, and they cannot sustain life. The human body, starving, begins to consume itself. Fat reserves go first, then muscle. The body breaks down its own tissues to keep the essential organs functioning. People become skeletal, moving slowly to conserve energy. The mind begins to falter as well. Starvation affects cognition, memory, emotional regulation. The world takes on a dreamlike quality, thoughts becoming slow and thick like honey. Hospitals are overwhelmed, though there's little they can do. Intravenous nutrition can keep someone alive temporarily, but the supplies are finite and the line of patients infinite. Doctors and nurses, themselves starving, continue working with a dedication that borders on sacred. They know they're only easing suffering, not preventing death, but they do it anyway because that's what healing means, even when healing is impossible. The young and the elderly die first. Children, with their small bodies and high metabolic needs, cannot survive long without food. The old, already weakened by age, follow quickly. The middle-aged and strong last longer, but their fate is only delayed, not averted. In homes and hospitals, in shelters and streets, humanity begins its final chapter. There are still pockets of hope, islands of determination. Research stations continue working, scientists running experiments until the moment they can no longer hold a pen. They leave detailed notes, comprehensive records, messages to whoever might one day find them. This is what we learned. This is what we understood. This is what we were. It's a gesture toward immortality, toward meaning in the face of meaninglessness. In one laboratory, a team succeeds in creating a strain of bacteria that can perform photosynthesis at enhanced efficiency. It's a genuine breakthrough, the kind that would have won Nobel Prizes in the old world. They celebrate quietly, knowing it's come too late. There's no longer an industrial base to manufacture the necessary growth media at scale. There aren't enough healthy humans to construct the facilities needed. The breakthrough is recorded, added to humanity's final scientific legacy, and then the scientists return to their slow dying. Artists continue creating until their hands no longer obey their minds. Musicians compose final symphonies. Painters create last works with whatever materials remain. Writers fill journals with observations, poetry, philosophy. There's a need to say something before the silence, to leave a mark that says, "We were here, we mattered, we loved, and thought, and created." Even if no one ever sees these works, they matter to their creators. Meaning doesn't require an audience. Some people spend their final days in nature, or what used to be nature. They sit in places where forests once stood, remembering. They walk along riversides, now cutting raw channels through bare earth, and recall when those banks were green. They go to the ocean and watch waves that are clearer than they've been in millions of years, a clarity that speaks of death rather than purity. It's a way of saying goodbye, of witnessing the world's transformation one last time before joining it in silence. Families stay together, choosing to face the end in each other's presence. Parents tell their children stories about the green world, painting pictures with words of forests and meadows, gardens and parks. The children listen with wide eyes, trying to imagine colors and textures they've never seen. These stories are gifts, ways of preserving something precious, even if only in memory, even if those memories will soon cease to exist. In the final days, as starvation reaches its inevitable conclusion, many people report strange experiences. Hallucinations are common as the brain, deprived of glucose, begins to malfunction. But some describe feelings of peace, of acceptance, even of beauty. The dying brain releases endorphins, nature's own mercy perhaps, easing the transition. People see visions often of green growing things, of forests and gardens, as if the mind in its final moments reaches for what it misses most. The last human breaths are taken in silence, or in whispers, or in prayer. Some die alone, others surrounded by loved ones who are themselves only hours from following. There's no drama in most deaths, no final speeches or profound revelations. people simply become too weak to continue, close their eyes, and don't open them again. It's quiet, this ending, almost gentle, if anything about starvation can be gentle. As humanity fades, the planet continues its transformation. Without human activity, no more factories, no more vehicles, no more power plants. Certain forms of pollution cease. The air becomes cleaner in some ways, though also increasingly devoid of oxygen. The noise pollution that had become humanity's constant backdrop falls silent. The radio waves that Earth had been broadcasting into space for a century grow still. From the perspective of any distant observers, Earth would simply go quiet, its technological signature winking out. The infrastructure of civilization begins to decay. Buildings stand empty, their windows dark. Roads, without maintenance, begin to crack and crumble. Dams, without human operators, either hold or fail, depending on their design. Those that fail release sudden floods downstream, reshaping valleys that were already being reshaped by erosion. Cities, humanity's greatest architectural achievements, become monuments to absence. The remaining animals continue their own decline. A few species, those that can subsist on detritus and dead organic matter, or those that can cannibalize their own kind, persist longer than others. Rats and cockroaches, carrion beetles and vultures have a temporary advantage. They feast on the dead of other species, including humans, buying themselves a few more weeks or months. But even scavengers need an ecosystem to scavenge from. When the dead are gone, the scavengers will follow. In the oceans, similar dynamics play out. Creatures that live in the deep sea, which already survived on the rain of organic matter from surface waters, find that rain continuing as dead fish sink into the abyss. Deep-sea scavengers and bacteria consume these gifts, but the supply is finite. Once the surface waters are empty, nothing more will fall from above. The deep ocean, which has existed in darkness for billions of years, will become even emptier. Some microorganisms will survive. Bacteria that can metabolize sulfur compounds or methane that can extract energy from chemical reactions rather than from light or from consuming other life. These specialists will persist. They'll continue their invisible work of chemical transformation, unaware that the biosphere they once supported has collapsed. In a sense, they'll inherit the Earth, though it's a profoundly diminished Earth, one stripped of the diversity and complexity that had accumulated over billions of years. The atmosphere continues its slow shift. Oxygen levels, which have been stable for hundreds of millions of years at around 21%, begin a gradual decline. It's not precipitous. The atmosphere is vast. The oceans hold tremendous amounts of dissolved oxygen, but the trend is unmistakable. Computer models that were running in those final days suggested oxygen would remain breathable for decades or even centuries, but eventually, inevitably, it would drop below the threshold needed to support animal life. Without photosynthesis, no new oxygen enters the system. Every fire, every combustion process, every breath taken by every remaining animal slowly depletes the reserves. The oceans absorb some atmospheric oxygen, trying to reach equilibrium with the changing air. The process is slow, operating on geological timescales, but it's inexorable. Carbon dioxide, meanwhile, continues to accumulate. Volcanic activity still releases CO2. Decomposition of all the organic matter, the billions of tons of dead plants and animals, releases carbon back into the atmosphere. Without plants to draw it back down, without phytoplankton to absorb it from the oceans, CO2 levels rise. The greenhouse effect intensifies, though the effects are complex and mediated by other factors like water vapor and cloud cover. Let's take a break here at the edge of deep time. We've walked through the immediate collapse, watched as the intricate web of life came undone thread by thread. Your mind may feel heavy with all we've witnessed. That's natural. Let it settle like sediment drifting through water. Ahead lies the longest journey through centuries and millennia, through geological ages and planetary transformation. It's a meditation on time itself, on the patience of planets, on the long silence that follows when the music stops. When you're ready to drift forward through the ages, we'll begin again. Until then, rest. Breathe. Let the darkness hold you gently. The vent communities have evolved significantly. 100 million years is enough time for substantial evolutionary change. The tube worms and shrimp that inhabit the vents now would be recognizable as related to those from human times. But they're different species, adapted to the specific conditions of their environments. They're living fossils in a sense, the last holdouts of complex life. But they're also constantly evolving, constantly adapting, constantly changing. On land, some of the bacterial communities have expanded slightly. In certain favorable locations, perhaps areas with volcanic activity that provides heat and chemicals, or deep valleys where moisture accumulates, bacterial mats have grown into small oases of life. They're still microscopic, still simple, but they're functioning ecosystems in miniature, with producer bacteria and consumer bacteria and recyclers all interacting in complex chemical networks. Could these bacterial communities be the seed of life's recovery? Possibly. If one were to develop efficient photosynthesis, if it were to proliferate widely, if it were to oxygenate its local environment enough to support other organisms, then perhaps, over millions more years, complexity could return. But it's a long shot. The conditions need to be just right, and even then, the path from bacteria to complex life is not guaranteed. Earth managed it once before, in the Precambrian, but it took billions of years. 500 million years after the disappearance, Earth has been transformed by geology. The continents have rearranged themselves into new configurations. Oceans have opened and closed. Mountain ranges have risen and been worn flat. If a geologist from human times could examine this world, they would find the rock layers fascinating. There would be a clear boundary, a point in the geological record where fossils suddenly stop. Below that line, abundant evidence of life. Above it, almost nothing. The oxygen is down to around 3%. This is approaching the level seen in Earth's early atmosphere before the Great Oxygenation Event 2.5 billion years ago. It's enough to create a thin ozone layer that provides some protection from UV radiation, but not much. The surface of the Earth is bathed in ultraviolet light that would have been harmful to most organisms from the age of plants. The climate has stabilized into a pattern different from anything in the Phanerozoic. Without land plants to influence the carbon cycle, without forests to store carbon, the atmospheric CO2 remains high. This keeps the planet relatively warm on average, though ice ages still occur during favorable orbital configurations. The oceans are warm and acidic. The land is barren and eroding slowly. Life remains minimal. The vent communities persist, though they've evolved into forms that would be unrecognizable to biologists from human times. Some bacterial communities on land have managed to eke out existence for 500 million years, though they've been through countless extinctions and recolonizations as local conditions changed. They're survivors, but not thriving, just holding on. One billion years after the disappearance, we approach the limits of what's meaningful to imagine. The sun has brightened noticeably. It increases in luminosity by about 10% every billion years as it ages. This makes Earth warmer than it was. The oceans are beginning to evaporate faster. The carbonate-silicate cycle, which regulates Earth's CO2 over geological timescales through weathering and volcanic outgassing, is breaking down as water becomes scarcer. The oxygen is now around 2% trace amounts, barely distinguishable from abiotic production. The ozone layer is thin and patchy. UV radiation floods the surface. Any life that persists must be either deep underground, deep underwater, or highly resistant to radiation. The bacteria that remain have evolved robust DNA repair mechanisms, thick protective coatings, or the ability to go dormant for extended periods. The continents have gone through complete cycles of assembly and breakup. Supercontinents have formed and fragmented multiple times, driven by the relentless churning of mantle convection. The current configuration of land masses would be meaningless to anyone from human times. There's no North America, no Africa, no Australia. Just arrangements of cratons and terrains that have been shuffled and reshuffled like cards in a deck. The vent communities, remarkably, still exist. They've evolved beyond recognition, but the ecological principle remains the same. chemosynthetic bacteria supporting simple animal life in the eternal darkness of the deep ocean. These communities have now persisted for 1 billion years without sunlight, without plants, without the complex biosphere that once existed above them. They're a testament to life's tenacity, to its ability to find a foothold anywhere chemistry allows. But even they are threatened now. As the oceans slowly evaporate under the brightening sun, as the ocean basins grow more saline and the chemistry shifts, the conditions that support vent life are changing. Some vents are becoming too hot, others too saline, others depleted of the chemicals that feed the bacteria. The vent communities are in slow decline, and there's no recovery possible. They're living on borrowed time. On land, life is almost entirely absent, except in the most protected environments. Deep caves, perhaps, where conditions have remained stable. Underground aquifers, where liquid water still exists, and bacteria can metabolize minerals. These are refugia, but they're disconnected from each other, isolated islands with no possibility of gene flow, no possibility of expansion. Evolution continues within each refuge, but its evolution going nowhere, trapped in a dead end. The surface of the planet is hostile beyond anything Earth has experienced in the past 3 billion years. The temperature swings wildly between day and night without vegetation or atmosphere to moderate it. The thin atmosphere provides little insulation. The UV radiation is intense. The occasional rainstorm is violent and acidic, scouring whatever it touches. This is a world in its death throes, not yet dead, but moving inexorably towards sterility. Two billion years after the disappearance, Earth is approaching the end of its habitability. The sun is now 20% brighter than it was in human times. The oceans are evaporating rapidly on geological timescales. Water vapor rises into the upper atmosphere, where UV radiation breaks it apart into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen, being light, escapes to space. Earth is slowly, irreversibly losing its water. The oxygen in the atmosphere spikes temporarily, a cruel irony as water is broken down and hydrogen escapes, leaving oxygen behind. But this oxygen isn't from life. It's from photodissociation, from the death of the ocean, and it's temporary. The oxygen will eventually be consumed by reactions with surface rocks, by oxidation of minerals, leaving behind a thick atmosphere of nitrogen and carbon dioxide, but no oxygen, no water, no life. The last vent communities are dying. The ocean chemistry has shifted too far. The vents still exist, still emit their hot, mineral-rich fluids, but the bacteria that once metabolized those minerals have vanished. The tube worms and shrimp that depended on those bacteria are extinct. The deep ocean, for the first time in perhaps 3 billion years, is truly sterile. Life's last refuge has failed. Are there bacteria still surviving in deep underground aquifers? Possibly. If liquid water still exists miles below the surface, if the chemistry is right, then bacterial communities might persist even as the surface dies. These would be Earth's last living organisms, clinging to existence in the deep subsurface in conditions not unlike those on Mars or beneath the ice of Europa. But they're beyond our ability to observe, beyond the reach of this thought experiment. In any meaningful sense, Earth is dead. 3 billion years after the disappearance, Earth has become Venus's twin. The oceans are gone, boiled away. The surface temperature is hundreds of degrees Celsius. The atmosphere is thick with carbon dioxide and nitrogen, creating a runaway greenhouse effect. The surface is barren rock, baked and sterile. No water, no oxygen, no life. The planet that once teemed with biodiversity, that was green and blue and white with life in ocean and cloud, is now gray and brown and dead. The geological processes continue. Volcanoes still erupt, tectonic plates still move, though more slowly as the planet's interior cools. Impacts from asteroids still occur occasionally, adding their violence to an already violent world. But these are just physics now, just chemistry. There's no biology, no life, no evolution. Earth has become a dead rock, still orbiting the sun, still spinning, still subject to the laws of thermodynamics and gravity, but empty of the improbable complexity we call life. And yet, 4 billion years after the disappearance, something remarkable might happen. The sun, aging and expanding, will begin its red giant phase. It will swell enormously, perhaps engulfing the inner planets. Perhaps not, the calculations are uncertain. But even if Earth survives being swallowed, it will be scorched beyond recognition, its surface melted, its atmosphere stripped away, its remaining mass cooked in the outer layers of the dying sunday. This is the ultimate end. Not with the disappearance of plants, but with the death of the sun itself. Yet the story reminds us that the loss of plants, that first catastrophe we imagined at the beginning of this long meditation, was itself a kind of death. It was the death of Earth's biosphere, the end of the complex, interconnected web of life that made our planet unique in all the solar system and perhaps unique in all the galaxy. We've traveled so far together across billions of years through the death and silence of a world. Your mind has held this vast darkness, this immense loss. Now it's time to come home. Time to return from deep time to this moment, this breath, this night where you lie safe and the world still lives. What remains now is not more loss, but understanding. Not more darkness, but a gentle light of appreciation. Let's gather the meaning of this journey together. Let's find what gift this dark meditation has given us. When you're ready and take all the time you need, we'll close this circle. We'll return to gratitude. We'll remember why we walked through shadow in the first place. Settle deeper into comfort. Soften your breath. We're almost home. Part 4. Closing reflection. What we learned in the darkness. And now, dear listener, we've traveled far together through this imagined catastrophe. 3 hours have passed, perhaps, or perhaps you've drifted in and out of sleep, catching pieces of this story like fragments of a dream. That's fitting, because this has been a kind of dream, a thought experiment, a meditation on interconnection and fragility. Let's return now to the world as it is, the world where you're lying comfortably, where the air is rich with oxygen, where, somewhere nearby, even if you can't see it, plants are quietly doing their work, converting sunlight into energy, releasing oxygen, drawing down carbon dioxide, holding soil in place, providing food and habitat, creating the foundation upon which all terrestrial life depends. We often don't think about plants. They're just there, furniture of the world, background. We notice the beautiful ones, the flowers, the majestic trees, but we take for granted the grass beneath our feet, the microscopic phytoplankton in the ocean, the algae on pond surfaces. These humble organisms are doing the most important work on Earth, and they ask nothing in return except sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Our journey through the imagined catastrophe has shown us what Earth would be without them. The immediate shock, the visual absence, the strangeness of a world stripped of green, the cascading consequences, herbivores dying, then carnivores, then scavengers, the slower changes, erosion, climate shift, atmospheric transformation, and finally, over millions of years, the complete sterilization of a once living world. It's a dark vision, yes, but there's something beautiful in it too. Beautiful in the sense that it illuminates truth. It shows us the web of connections that normally remain invisible. Every breath you take is a gift from plants and phytoplankton. Every bite of food you eat depends on plants. Even if you're eating meat, the animal you're eating consumed plants. The stable climate that allowed human civilization to flourish over the past 10,000 years was maintained partly by plants. We are not separate from nature. We are not above it or beyond it. We are woven into it so thoroughly that our continued existence depends on organisms we barely notice. The smallest phytoplankton, the humblest grass, these are our partners in survival. When they thrive, we thrive. When they suffer, we suffer. And here's the thing, the important thing, the reason this thought experiment matters. Plants are suffering. Not disappearing overnight. Of course, that was our impossible scenario. but they're under pressure. Deforestation clears ancient forests. Climate change shifts habitats faster than plants can migrate. Ocean acidification threatens phytoplankton. Pollution, habitat loss, invasive species. All of these put pressure on plant communities worldwide. We're not facing the overnight catastrophe we imagined, but we are living through a slower version of it. An incremental loss of biodiversity, a steady degradation of ecosystems, a gradual warming of the planet. The consequences aren't as immediate or dramatic as in our thought experiment, but they're real and they're accumulating. Yet there's hope in understanding. Knowledge is power, not the power to dominate, but the power to choose differently. When we understand how deeply we depend on plants, how intricately we're connected to the biosphere, we can make different decisions. We can choose to protect forests, to reduce emissions, to support sustainable agriculture, to preserve biodiversity. Every plant you see tomorrow, every tree in the park, every potted flower on a windowsill, every blade of grass pushing through concrete is a small miracle. It's a molecular machine that runs on sunlight, turning air and water into living tissue, creating oxygen as a byproduct. It's part of a system that has sustained complex life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Take a moment tomorrow, when you wake, to really look at a plant. Notice its color, that green that our entire thought experiment was about. That green comes from chlorophyll, the molecule that captures sunlight and drives photosynthesis. It's the color of life itself, the color that makes our planet unique when seen from space. Touch a leaf if you can. Feel its texture, its coolness, its surprising strength. That leaf is converting sunlight into chemical energy. It's breathing, taking in CO2 and releasing oxygen. It's transpiring, pulling water up from roots and releasing it into the air, helping to drive the water cycle. It's doing all of this silently, constantly, asking nothing from you except perhaps that you not destroy it. Think about the tree outside your window, if you have one. It's been there longer than you have, probably. It's weathered storms and seasons. It's provided shade in summer, beauty in autumn. It's housed birds and insects. It's stored carbon that might otherwise be in the atmosphere warming the planet. And it will likely be there after you're gone, continuing its patient work unless something cuts it down. Consider the phytoplankton you'll never see, drifting in oceans you may never visit. They're producing perhaps half of the oxygen you breathe. They're the foundation of marine food webs that feed billions of humans. They're so small that thousands would fit on a pinhead, yet collectively they outweigh all the animals on Earth. They're dying in some regions as ocean chemistry changes, and this matters. It matters profoundly, even if you never see them, even if you live thousands of miles from the ocean. Our thought experiment, dark as it was, gives us perspective. It helps us appreciate what we have, by imagining its absence. It's a kind of gratitude practice, if you will, honoring the plants that sustain us by fully understanding what losing them would mean. And perhaps it's also a call to action, though I say that gently, here in the quiet hours before sleep. Action doesn't have to be grand or heroic. It can be simple, planting a tree, supporting conservation organizations, choosing products that don't drive deforestation, teaching children to appreciate plants, voting for policies that protect ecosystems, making space in your life and in the world for green growing things. Because here's the ultimate truth our journey has revealed. We need plants far more than they need us. If humans disappeared tomorrow, plants would thrive. They'd reclaim our cities, cover our roads, transform our farms into forests. In a few thousand years, you'd barely know we'd been here. The biosphere would recover, adapt, flourish. But if plants disappeared, as we've seen, everything falls apart. The whole intricate structure of terrestrial and marine ecosystems, built up over hundreds of millions of years, collapses within months. The atmosphere itself begins to change within years. Over millennia, the planet becomes sterile. We're the dependent ones in this relationship. We're the vulnerable ones. Plants are the foundation, and we're built upon them. This isn't meant to make you anxious. You're lying comfortably, breathing easily, and the world of plants is still here, still doing its work. This is meant to give you peace, actually the peace that comes from understanding your place in something larger. You're part of the biosphere. You're connected to every plant through your breath, through your food, through the air you share. You're home, in the deepest sense, woven into the living fabric of Earth. Rest now. Let your breathing slow. Feel the oxygen filling your lungs, oxygen that came from plants, that was gifted to you freely by organisms that ask nothing in return. Feel gratitude, if you can, or simply acknowledgement. The plants are out there in the darkness, still growing, still photosynthesizing where the sun shines, still holding the world together. Tomorrow, you'll wake to a world that's still green, still alive, still abundant with growing things. It's not guaranteed forever nothing is, but it's here now, this moment, this night. And that's worth honoring. That's worth protecting. That's worth falling asleep grateful for. The earth turns beneath you. The seasons cycle. The plants grow and rest, in rhythms as old as complex life itself. You're part of that rhythm, breathing in what they breathe out, returning to the air what they need to grow. It's a partnership, a dance, a mutualism that makes life possible. So sleep well, knowing you're held by this invisible web of connection. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, a forest is growing, A field is resting. An ocean is filled with drifting microscopic plants. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow you'll wake to green things, to living things, to a planet that still breathes with you. And perhaps, when you do wake, you'll see the world a little differently. You'll notice the green more acutely. You'll appreciate the oxygen more consciously. You'll understand, in your bones, that you're not separate from nature, but a part of it, dependent on it, sustained by it, connected to it in every moment of your life. This is the gift of our dark thought experiment, that by imagining loss, we learn to see what we have. By walking through the valley of the shadow, we learn to appreciate the light. By contemplating a world without plants, we come to understand how miraculous it is that they exist at all. So rest now in that knowledge. Let it settle into your consciousness like sediment slowly drifting down through water. You're safe. You're breathing. The world is alive. And tomorrow, there will still be plants, patient, silent, essential, doing the work that makes all other life possible. Close your eyes. Let the darkness hold you. Let your mind drift like a seed on the wind, floating gently towards sleep. Somewhere nearby, a plant is releasing oxygen into the night. Breathe it in. Hold it, release it, breathe in again. This is the rhythm of life on Earth. This is the pattern that has persisted for hundreds of millions of years and will, if we're wise and careful and lucky, persist for millions more. You're part of it. You've always been part of it. And you always will be, as long as plants continue their quiet, essential work. Sleep now. Dream of green things, if you dream at all. And wake tomorrow grateful for the impossible, improbable miracle of a living planet covered in organisms that turn sunlight into life and give us the gift of breath. The earth spins on, the plants grow on. And you, dear listener, can rest on, held by the knowledge that you're home, truly home, in a world that sustains you, that holds you, that breathes with you.